Hello YouTube, this is Marauders here, and this is my ASUS ROG Ally. It runs Windows like the Lenovo Legion Go and the Zotac Zone and many other handheld Windows PCs. Okay, it doesn't run Linux like the Steam Deck. So the main advantage about this is that because it's running Windows, there's no problem with compatibility because there's no problem with anti-cheat or anything, and you don't have to do any funny business trying to get Game Pass or any other launcher or DRM solution to run on it. Unfortunately, there aren't much information about running Windows without a mouse and keyboard, especially on something like the ROG Ally where you don't even have a touchpad on it. So the information on doing that is very limited. Here are some tips on how to use your Windows Handheld Gaming PC efficiently. Now, before we continue on this journey, let's just discuss the elephant in the room, okay? Standby. Okay, modern consoles, it's great to really like pick up a Switch, play a game, pick up a Switch on the bus, play a game while you're riding the bus, and then put it in standby when you get in your destination, and just continue after that. Windows games can't work like that because Windows is a general purpose OS. So when it goes into standby and sleep, a lot of things happen to the drivers and hardware, and games aren't really prepared for that. So I'm not saying it won't work all the time, but you shouldn't expect that to be the case. So just always remember when you can't just put a game in standby and expect it to come out working on the other end when you're playing on these handheld gaming PCs. Always expect that there's a good chance that your game might not resume properly. There's really nothing much we can do about that. That's just what happens when it's a modern OS, and it would take a lot of extra effort on the developer side to try and fix this problem. And technically, for Microsoft to fix it, they would have to gimp a lot of generic OS functionality from Windows in order to do that. So yeah, no good solution is going to come out anytime soon. So just remember that standby isn't going to be perfect, and work around that. So first, let's talk about the touchscreen. So the basics are basic. So single tap to tap, and tap and hold to emulate the right click of your mouse button. Now, how the gestures work will depend on what program you're using it in. For example, in a modern web browser like Edge, gestures all work as you expect. You can drag it around, you can zoom. So everything just works in a modern application. But in something like that is very old and legacy, like your File Explorer, how well the gestures and interface works is really much depends on the program support itself. So that's unavoidable because in Windows you have programs and apps that are just made, well, for a very, very long time. There's a long piece of legacy with Windows. So the best thing about understanding how to use the apps on Windows with the touchscreen is to just play around with it and figure out what kind of gestures and what's the best way to use it with the touchscreen, especially for old legacy applications like File Explorer. And one other thing about the touchscreen is that programs can interfere with this default behavior of clicking and dragging. For example, if I go to Steam, so you can see that I can drag simple enough. The drag gesture works. There's no zoom, okay? So I can tap on something. But if I attempt to right click on something, for example, if I do a tap and hold, you can see that nothing happens. The whole gesture isn't coming out. That's because sometimes programs just take over how they want the touchscreen to work, and it causes problems like this. I'll show you how to take care of this later, but now in the first, what I want you to take away from this is that you should just understand that there are times where your touchscreen might not work, where all your gestures might not work as you expect, because each program can decide how they want the gestures to work. So next, let's talk about the taskbar. So my main recommendation on your main the taskbar setting first is that if your rotation lock isn't already enabled, you want to enable that, because if you don't enable this rotation lock, and when you're playing a game and you decide you do something to trigger a rotation, games really don't like that. So you really should turn on rotation lock until you actually need to like rotate the screen, so that you don't unknowingly trigger a rotation. The other thing that to be aware of is that sliding up from the bottom of the screen brings up the start menu. This is going to be something important to remember in later. Okay, so once again, just slide up from the bottom of the screen brings up the start menu. Now let's go look at the taskbar settings. So we just hold on the taskbar and then we tap taskbar settings. Okay, so here we see this touch keyboard setting here. So that's referring to this icon here. Now it says here when no keyboard attached. So depending on your handheld gaming PC, that should be all the time. But so if this icon doesn't appear even though you don't have a keyboard attached, you might want to just go here and say make the touch keyboard button appear always. And the next thing is that you have another thing here called the virtual touchpad. So go ahead and check this on. So what this enables is that this enables a little virtual touchpad which you can control your mouse pointer. Okay, and it's one of those smart touchpads. So actually you can actually do gestures on the touchpad as well. Okay, so why do we need this virtual touchpad? Like I showed you just now, sometimes there are apps that disable certain gestures on the touchscreen and you still need to get to certain controls. So let's go back to Steam again. I'll bring up Steam. So remember previously on Steam, when we try to do a tap and hold for the right click, it doesn't work. But now that we have the access to the virtual touchpad, we can just go and click on the right mouse button and get it to work just like a normal laptop. Okay, so this is the main reason why you need to know about the presence of the virtual touchpad, so that you are able to handle situations and programs where your touch gestures just don't work as expected. So one more setting is this one that is here under taskbar behaviors. So on the ASUS ROG Ally, there is this option would have been enabled on default. So optimize taskbar for interactions when the device is used as a tablet. So what this does is it will just basically, first of all, it will resize the taskbar icons to be bigger. Okay, and of course the taskbar itself will be hidden normally by default to give you a bit more screen real estate. It's up to you whether you need this setting. Personally, feels a bit better to me, but sometimes it's a bit annoying that I have to bring up the taskbar just to be able to tap on the keyboard or touchpad icons. Okay, but it's just good to know for you if you decide that you want to enable or disable this setting. So on devices like the ROG Ally, there are no touchpads on this thing like on the Steam Deck or the Lenovo Legion Go or the Zotac Zone. So what happens is that they will always include a system where you can use the controller to emulate mouse buttons. emulate mouse controls using the controller. And also, sometimes they will allow you to do a quick switching. It will automatically switch from the mouse mode to joystick mode, depending on which program was focused. For example, if I go focus on Steam, you can see that the mouse pointer is just hidden at the bottom here and the mouse has stopped working. This is because in whatever program that is controlling this behavior is doing some intelligent auto switching that decides that depending on the program that you are focused on, you might not want to use your controllers as a mouse. But of course, in Steam mode, especially when we're in non-big picture, we actually want the mouse to be able to work. But of course, because it has already switched to controller mode, for example, if I enable big picture mode now, I never actually go into big picture mode. Okay. So you can see it works as a controller as expected. But because whatever's controlling the ROG Ally's control emulation doesn't really understand have knowledge of whether Steam is in big picture mode or not. It can only know that if you are focused on Steam, then therefore you probably don't want the controller to work as a mouse, which is wrong. So the takeaway from this is that if you have something that does this intelligent auto switching like the ROG Ally, do learn how to turn on and off specific controller modes. For example, in the ROG Ally, I can just hit up the command center, and here you can see there's a control mode, and I'm going to just say, I'm going to switch it. You can either switch it to auto, which does the auto selection, or we can say gamepad or desktop. So if I'm in desktop, you can see everything just works exactly. It will work like a mouse because we've locked the controller to desktop mode. So do remember to learn how to switch between your input modes on your gaming handheld. Okay, so as another example of why it's so important to understand how you can switch your controllers between mouse and controller mode if you have a handheld PC that doesn't have a built-in touchpad. So here we have the gamepad tester web page running in my web browser. So right now, obviously, the ROG Ally's Armor Crate is detecting it as I'm using a browser, and well, normally people need to use a mouse on the browser, so I can't test the gamepad. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to switch to gamepad mode now. So once I switch to gamepad mode, you can see that, okay, we can start testing and using the gamepad just as normal. So this demonstrates how important it is that you really must, if you have a handheld gaming PC without a built-in touchpad, you really need to know how to switch between mouse mode and controller mode. Or you're just going to be lost in certain situations. Because I guess I do believe if you're trying to do any game streaming from the browser itself, obviously you want it to recognize your controls as a controller. Okay, now let's tackle one of the biggest questions when we're playing games on a keyboardless handheld gaming PC. How the heck do I enter my character's name? Okay, so we're gonna go in, we're gonna say, oh, okay, Wenzhen had created too many new characters in this game already. Okay, yep. Okay, so we're just gonna pick someone. Okay, so now we're gonna enter the name. Now, unlike in the console, you notice that, hey, there's no virtual keyboard coming up. That's because the notion that, to PC game developers, the notion that someone is playing their games on a PC that doesn't have a keyboard attached, this is something really, really new to them. And, well, they're going to have to take some time to figure out what to do. So what are the options that we have now? You could, if you're playing a Steam game, you could bind a control method in so that it shows the Steam input, keyboard input, which yeah, that's great. I've seen the keyboard before, but I really don't want to sacrifice one of my buttons to do it. If you're using something like the ASUS ROG Ally, you notice that there's a button here in the command center that brings up the keyboard, which of course now we can type. Okay. And of course, in the ROG Ally, your command center in Armory Crate, you can also configure it so that if you press like one of the back buttons and then you press something else, it will also bring up the keyboard. Okay, so that's the game bar. Which button is it? Okay. Okay, so those are your options if the developer of your handheld gaming PC had made all the shortcuts and so on. Now, if you just did a clean install of Windows on the handheld gaming PC and you don't have any of that, don't worry. Remember what I said during the taskbar thing. Swiping up from the bottom of the screen brings up the taskbar. And what was on the taskbar? The keyboard button. And you tap everything, give focus back to the game, and you tap on the game. So you need to focus on the game. So just now that first tap must have just dismissed the start menu but didn't give focus to the game. But okay, so now we can have access to the keyboard already. Now, again, games can be fickle and weird. So for some reason, if for any reason that you tapped on the screen, you gave focus back to the game, and in a situation where you're supposed to just be able to type and get your name entered, and the game just doesn't respond, you have another option, which is you click on this gear icon here, click the keyboard layout, and click traditional. Okay, so now that this keyboard, notice that it is a bit bigger and there are more keys on it. There are even function keys on it. The way this keyboard sends signals to the game is a bit more native than the other default keyboard. And sometimes the one game I've seen this happen with was Harvest Moon from the Xbox Game Pass. And that keyboard worked with the game. Only that keyboard worked, not this default keyboard. Okay? Another thing that you might find irritating is that, hey, what if the name field was actually at the bottom? Notice the screen doesn't slide up and stuff. Because once again, this is more a generic keyboard. It is not... The window games don't really pay attention to the system event of pushing this keyboard up, especially on Windows games. So if the keyboard's blocking you, use the force and just type blindly, or you could undock it. But when you undock the keyboard, this keyboard is definitely not the traditional keyboard. So yeah, if your game is one of those that doesn't listen to normal keyboard inputs and only listens to the traditional keyboard input, you have to use the dock traditional mode. And well, I hope it's not blocking you then. And one more caveat on this keyboard thing. Now, in Windows 11, this Microsoft has modified it so that the start bar can be brought up over a full screen game. Okay, even if it's running in full screen mode. So if for whatever reason, when you're in full screen mode, you cannot bring up the start menu and you need the keyboard, you're kind of out of luck. So you would then have to go into the game and then set it so that the graphics display mode is in borderless window or window. Hopefully, all you needed to do was to just name your character, so you could name your character in either borderless window or window, name your character, come back in and switch it back to full screen if you wanted the extra performance. The note that people have been saying is that in Windows 11, borderless full screen and full screen, especially if they're running on the same resolution, shouldn't matter. The performance should be more or less the same, but you know, sometimes you just want to squeeze the extra performance out. So for those of you who just really want to run it in full screen, that's a note for you if you can't bring up the keyboard. So those were my tips on how to use Windows on your handheld gaming PC better, and I hope this allows you to get a more enjoyable experience out of your Windows on your handheld gaming PC, and I hope you have a great time playing games on them. This is Marauders. I will see you all in the next video.